In the autumn of 1997, in the quiet timber town of Havenwood, Oregon, an 8-year-old girl named Lily Peterson walked into the forest behind her best friend's house and vanished forever. Her disappearance left a wound in the community, a 25-year mystery that baffled police and broke her family. For her best friend, Samuel Miller, it left a silence filled with unanswered questions. Everyone believed the secret to what happened to Lily was buried, with time, lost to the dense, unforgiving woods. They were wrong. The answer wasn't in a cold case file or a suspect interview. It was waiting in the one place her memory was still alive, the sanctuary she and Sam had built together. It was hidden in their treehouse. October 26, 1997, was a perfect autumn day. The air in Havenwood smelled of damp earth and pine, and the trees that crowded the town were a riot of gold and burning red. For 8-year-old Sam Miller and Lily Peterson, it was a day for adventure. They were an inseparable pair, two halves of the same spirit. Sam was the cautious planner. Lily was the fearless explorer. Their kingdom was the forest that began where Sam's backyard ended, and in the heart of that kingdom stood their castle, a crooked but sturdy treehouse nestled in the arms of an old-growth oak. Sam's uncle, a quiet, awkward man named Arthur Vance, had helped them build it. He'd supplied the wood and the nails and showed them how to hoist the planks into the branches, his large, clumsy hands guiding their small ones. That afternoon, the light filtering through the canopy cast a golden glow inside the small wooden structure. Lily was buzzing with energy, her bright eyes wide with excitement. She was showing Sam the newest addition to her most prized possession, a silver charm bracelet that she never took off. "See," she said, pushing her wrist forward, "it's a squirrel for my 8th birthday." Sam leaned in to inspect the tiny, detailed squirrel. It joined a collection of other charms, a miniature book, a bicycle, a crescent moon. Each one was a memory, a milestone in her short, bright life. He could still remember the day she got the little bicycle charm, the same day she'd finally learned to ride without training wheels, her laughter echoing down the street as she wobbled triumphantly. "It's cool," Sam said, touching the charm gently. "Tonight we watch," Lily declared, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My dad says it's way too scary for kids, which means it's going to be awesome." Sam felt a familiar knot of fear and excitement. He hated scary movies, but he'd never admit it to Lily. He'd sit through anything just to see the look on her face, a mix of terror and delight. "My mom made popcorn," he offered. "Deal," Lily said, her grin wide and infectious. "I'll go home, finish my homework real fast, and be back by 7. Don't start without me." She scrambled down the rope ladder, her red cardigan a flash of color against the darkening bark of the tree. She paused at the bottom, looked up at him, and gave their secret wave, a silly 3-fingered salute. "See you later, Sammy." "See you later, Lily," he called back. He watched her disappear into the tapestry of ferns and fallen leaves, a small, bright figure swallowed by the vastness of the woods. He had no way of knowing it was the last time he would ever see her. By 7:15, the sun had bled out of the sky, leaving Havenwood draped in a deep, starless dark. Inside the Miller house, the television cast a flickering blue light across the living room. The opening credits had already rolled, and the first unsettling scenes were playing out. The bowl of popcorn sat untouched on the coffee table. Sam sat on the floor, his back against the couch, his eyes fixed on the front door. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves skittering across the porch made him jump. His mother, Sarah, came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Still." "No, Lily?" Sam shook his head, his gaze unwavering from the door. "She said she'd be here by 7. "Well, you know her," Sarah said with a gentle smile. "Probably got distracted chasing a firefly." But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece, a small frown line appearing between her eyebrows. At 7:30, the unease in the room had thickened into a tangible thing. The scary movie was forgotten. Its sounds now just a meaningless drone. Sarah picked up the phone and dialed the Petersons' number. Sam watched her, his stomach twisting into a tight, cold knot. He heard his mother's side of the conversation, her voice bright and casual at first, then slowly tightening with confusion. "Hi, Carol, it's Sarah." "I know, he's very excited." "She hasn't? Are you sure? Sam said she left your place hours ago to come straight here." "No, she's not here." There was a long pause. Sam could hear the faint, tinny sound of Carol Peterson's panicked voice on the other end of the line. His mother hung up the phone, her face pale. "She never made it home," she said, her voice a strained whisper. What happened next was a blur of motion and rising panic. Sam's father, Tom, grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. His mother was back on the phone, this time with the police. Sam was told to stay inside, to stay by the window, in case he saw her. He pressed his face against the cold glass of the living room window, peering out into the impenetrable darkness of the backyard. The beam of his father's flashlight cut a frantic, desperate path through the trees, illuminating nothing but shifting leaves and empty space. He searched for a flash of her red cardigan, for the familiar shape of his friend walking out of the shadows. But there was only the forest, silent, watching. Soon another light joined his father's, a strobing, piercing blue and red that swept across the trees and painted the walls of his house in terrifying colors. A police car had arrived. An officer knelt down to speak to him, his face grim. He asked Sam the same questions his parents had, his voice calm but urgent. "When was the last time you saw her? What was she wearing? Did she say anything strange?" Sam answered in a small, trembling voice, the image of Lily waving from the bottom of the ladder burning in his mind. He felt a profound, childish guilt, as if he had done something wrong, as if he had let her go. He was the one she was coming to see. He was the one. Waiting. He stayed at that window for hours, a small, silent sentinel. He watched as more flashlights joined the search, as the quiet woods of his childhood were transformed into a crime scene, filled with the urgent shouts of strangers. The world he knew, the safe, predictable world of an 8-year-old boy, had fractured. It had broken into a million sharp pieces, and in the space between them, a terrifying darkness had poured in. He was no longer waiting for his friend. He was waiting for a ghost. And in the deep, silent woods of Havenwood, the night had only just begun. The days that followed were a cold, gray blur. The disappearance of Lily Peterson became the singular obsessive focus of Havenwood. Search parties, composed of loggers, shopkeepers, and neighbors, combed the woods in methodical, desperate lines. Their bright orange vests were stark against the muted colors of the forest. Missing posters went up on every telephone pole and in every storefront window. Lily's bright, smiling face, a constant, painful reminder of what was lost. From his living room window, Sam Miller watched the slow, agonizing churn of the investigation. He was interviewed again and again by Sheriff Brody and then by state detectives. They were kind, but their questions felt heavy, adult, and impossible to answer. They made him trace his path with Lily on a large map, his small fingers shaking as he pointed to the treehouse. He told them everything he could remember, every word she'd said, every charm on her bracelet. The police focused their attention on the margins of society, transient workers from a nearby logging camp, a drifter who had been seen near the town's diner. They were easy targets, men with no ties to the community, no one to vouch for them. Sam would watch as they were brought into the small police station, their faces grim, only to be released hours later. It felt like they were chasing ghosts, looking in every direction except the right one, his uncle. Arthur was a constant presence in those first few weeks. He was staying at their house, sleeping on the couch. He moved with a quiet, somber air, making coffee for the searchers, speaking in hushed tones with Sam's parents. To the outside world, he was the image of a supportive brother, a grieving uncle. He would sit with Sam for long stretches, telling him stories about his own childhood, stories that seemed pointless and meandering. He was trying to fill the terrible silence that Lily had left behind. Then, on the fourth day, came a flicker of false hope. It was Arthur who found it. He'd gone out on his own, away from the main search party. into a dense thicket of blackberry bushes nearly a mile north of the Miller house. There, snagged on a thorn, was a small scrap of red fabric. It looked like it had been torn from a cardigan. The discovery redirected the entire investigation. Search grids were redrawn, helicopters circled the new area, and the weary volunteers trudged towards the blackberry thicket. For a day there was a renewed sense of urgency, a belief that they were finally close. But the trail went cold as quickly as it had appeared. The scrap of fabric led to nothing. It was just another dead end, another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit, and its discovery only served to deepen the despair when it yielded no further clues. Hope, once ignited, is a terrible thing to lose a second time. One evening, about a week after the fabric was found, Arthur sat next to Sam on his bed. He placed a box in Sam's lap. Inside was a model kit for a fighter jet, a complex web of plastic pieces and instructions. "Something to keep your hands busy," Arthur said, his voice soft. "Something to take your mind off things." Sam stared at the box, at the picture of the powerful plane soaring through a clear blue sky. It felt like an object from another world, a world that no longer existed. "They're not going to find her, are they?" Sam asked, the words barely a whisper. Arthur put a heavy hand on Sam's shoulder. It was meant to be comforting, but it felt cold. "Sometimes, Sammy," he said, his gaze distant, "angels like Lily are too good for this world. Sometimes they just fly away." The words didn't make sense to Sam. Lily wasn't an angel. She was a girl who loved scary movies and climbing trees. She wouldn't just fly away. She was supposed to come back. But Arthur's tone was final, as if he were closing a book. From that day on, he discouraged Sam from speaking about her. Whenever Sam would start a sentence with "Lily and I used to," Arthur would gently interrupt, changing the subject, suggesting they go outside and throw a baseball, anything to steer the conversation away from the past. He told Sam's parents that the boy needed to move on, that dwelling on it was unhealthy, and in their own fog of grief, they listened. Time began to pass, measured in the slow fading of the missing posters. The vibrant colors of Lily's face bleached under the sun, then grew ragged in the autumn rains. The national news crews packed up their vans and left. The search parties dwindled, then stopped altogether. The town's obsession softened into a permanent, collective scar. Lily Peterson became a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered to children who stayed out too late. For Sam, the grief didn't fade. It crystallized. It became a part of his architecture. Throughout middle school and high school, he became quieter, more withdrawn. He kept his friends. But there was a part of him that remained inaccessible, a room inside him with a locked door. The forest behind his house, once a kingdom of adventure, was now a place of menace. He never went back to the treehouse. He couldn't even look at the old oak without feeling a suffocating tightness in his chest. One afternoon, when he was 16, he walked home from school with friends. They took a shortcut that skirted the edge of the woods. One of them pointed towards the old oak. "Hey, isn't that the tree?" his friend asked, his voice full of morbid curiosity. "You know, with the treehouse?" Sam didn't answer. He just picked up his pace, his eyes fixed on the pavement in front of him, his knuckles white as he gripped the strap of his backpack. The silence that followed was heavy with his friend's awkward regret. They knew they had crossed a line. The weight of Lily's absence was in everything. It was in the empty seat next to him at graduation. It was in the pang of jealousy he felt when he saw his classmates making plans for the future, a future Lily was denied. Havenwood was no longer a home. It was a mausoleum. Every street corner, every hiking trail held a memory that was now tainted with loss. He knew he had to leave. The decision formed slowly, then all at once. He applied to colleges on the other side of the country, in sprawling cities made of concrete and steel, places with no dark, whispering forests. He needed to be somewhere he could breathe air that wasn't thick with ghosts. His departure was a quiet affair. His parents understood. Uncle Arthur, now grayer and even more reclusive, gave him $100 bill and a clumsy hug. "You do good out there, son," he'd said. "Leave all this bad stuff behind." As Sam drove out of Havenwood, he didn't look back. He was escaping the long, cold desert of uncertainty. He was running from a memory, not knowing that the most crucial part of it, the absolute truth of it, was still waiting for him, hidden under a loose floorboard, preserved in the silence of their forgotten castle in the sky. 25 years is a lifetime. For Samuel Miller, it was the time it took to build a new life, to construct a careful reality of glass and steel in a city far from the suffocating pines of Havenwood. He became an architect, a man who designed buildings with clean lines and logical floor plans, a world away from the chaotic, unresolved mess of his past. He rarely returned home, keeping his visits brief and dutiful. But now, at 33, he was back. Both of his parents were gone. His mother, Sarah, had passed from cancer 3 years prior, her quiet grief finally ending. His father, Tom, had followed just 2 months ago, a heart attack in his sleep. The house, a silent monument to a life that was, had been sold. Sam was there for one final grim task, to clear out the last remnants of his childhood, to pack away the ghosts before handing the keys to a stranger. He spent 2 days working in a haze of dust and memory. Every object he touched whispered a story, a stack of his father's old records, his mother's favorite reading glasses, still on the nightstand. He worked methodically, creating piles, donate, trash, keep. But he felt like he was disposing of evidence, not just possessions. On his last afternoon, with the house echoing and empty, a strange compulsion took hold of him. There was one last place he had to see. He walked out the back door and stood at the edge of the property, staring into the woods. The forest was thicker now, more overgrown, but the path was still there, a faint scar on the land. And rising above the canopy, he could just see the crooked roof of the treehouse. He hesitated. For more than 2 decades, that structure had been a no-go zone in his mind, a place cordoned off by yellow tape. But the thought of leaving, of letting it be torn down by the new owners without one last look, felt like a final, unbearable betrayal of Lily. He needed to say goodbye. The walk was shorter than he remembered. The woods felt different under his adult weight, the ground softer. And then he was there, standing at the base of the ancient oak. The treehouse was a wreck. It sagged to one side, its wood weathered to a skeletal gray. The rope ladder he and Arthur had braided was frayed and green with moss. It looked like a relic from a lost civilization. For a moment he just stood there, the silence of the woods pressing in on him. He could almost hear the echo of their laughter. He reached out and grasped the rope ladder. It felt damp and fragile in his hand. He gave it a tentative pull. It seemed to hold. With a deep breath he began to climb, his dress shoes slipping on the worn knots. He was halfway up when he heard it, a sickening, splintering crack. The rope went slack in his hands. He fell, a dead weight, crashing through the undergrowth and landing hard on his back on the floor of the treehouse. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and for a second he just lay there, staring up at the canopy, pain radiating through his shoulder. The old structure had groaned under his weight, but it was his fall that had delivered the final blow. As he pushed himself up, wincing, he saw that the impact had done more than just rattle his bones. A floorboard, one he and Lily had always complained was loose, had been completely dislodged from its rotted supports. It was flipped on its side, revealing the dark, hollow space beneath the floor. And in that space, there was something else. A small, dark rectangle. Sam crawled closer, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. He reached into the cavity, his fingers brushing away decades of dirt and dried leaves. He pulled the object out into the dim light. It was a small tin box, the kind used for mints or fishing lures, its surface pitted and rusted through with years of damp. He sat back on his heels, the box cold and heavy in his palm. It was sealed shut with rust. He took a rock and hammered at the edge. Again and again, his breath held tight in his chest. Finally, with a screech of tortured metal, the lid gave way. The contents were nestled in a bed of what looked like dried grass. The first thing he saw was a glint of silver. He reached in with trembling fingers and lifted it out. It was Lily's charm bracelet. The metal was tarnished, almost black in places, but it was unmistakably hers. He could see the little book, the bicycle, and the tiny, perfect squirrel. A wave of grief so powerful it was physical washed over him, and he had to brace himself against the floor. It was like holding a ghost. But there was something else in the box. Lying beneath the bracelet was a single, square photograph, a Polaroid. Its colors were faded, washed out with age, but the image was horribly clear. It was Lily. She wasn't smiling. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terror so pure it seemed to leap from the glossy paper. She was in a room he didn't recognize, a dark space with rough, uneven stone walls. He was looking just past the camera at whoever was holding it, and then Sam saw it. In the bottom right corner of the photograph cast on the stone wall behind Lily was a shadow, the distinct shape of a man's head and shoulder, and just beside the shadow, caught in the edge of the flash, was a sliver of a face, just an ear, a cheekbone, and the corner of a pair of familiar, wire-rimmed glasses. Time stopped. The sounds of the forest, the pain in his shoulder, everything dissolved. There was only the image, the stone wall, Lily's terrified eyes, and the unmistakable profile of the man who had helped them build this treehouse, the man who had comforted him, who had told him that angels sometimes fly away, his Uncle Arthur. It was a move of unimaginable arrogance and cruelty. Why not destroy the evidence? Because for Arthur, the box wasn't just evidence. It was a trophy, a secret relic of his victory hidden in the very heart of their kingdom. It was a final silent desecration of their memory, a way to keep a piece of his monstrous secret psychologically close to the nephew whose happiness he had so despised. The drive from the woods was a silent, disconnected dream. Sam drove automatically, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes on the road, but seeing only the ghostly image from the Polaroid. The rusted tin box sat on the passenger seat beside him, a radioactive object that had poisoned the air in the car. He didn't go to the Havenwood police station. He couldn't. He drove to a small, neat house on the other side of town, the home of a man who had been a fixture of his childhood nightmare, retired Sheriff Brody. Brody was an old man now, stooped and frail, but his eyes were still sharp. He opened the door and recognized Sam instantly, a flicker of old sadness crossing his face. Sam didn't waste time with pleasantries. He placed the tin box on the old sheriff's dining room table and opened the lid. Brody stared at the tarnished bracelet, his breath catching in his throat. He picked it up with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. Then he saw the photograph. He held it under the light, his hand trembling slightly. He looked from the photo to Sam, his expression a mixture of awe and horror. "After all this time," Brody whispered. He tapped the photo. "We need to get this to Evans. She's the sheriff now. She's different. She'll know what to do." Sheriff Diana Evans was indeed different. She met them at the station an hour later, her demeanor a sharp professional contrast to Brody's weary melancholy. She listened to Sam's story without interruption, her eyes never leaving his, her focus absolute. She handled the box and its contents with a careful, deliberate respect, placing each item into evidence bags herself. "You did the right thing, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice even. "We'll get these to the state crime lab immediately. I want a full workup. DNA. Off the bracelet if any has survived. A deep analysis of the photograph. The lab can work miracles these days." Sam just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He didn't mention his uncle. He couldn't bring himself to say the name, to voice the monstrous accusation that was screaming in his mind. What if he was wrong? What if it was just a trick of the light, a shadow that looked like someone he knew? He felt the crushing weight of the past, of being an 8-year-old boy nobody really listened to. He needed them to find the truth on their own. He needed proof. The waiting was a unique form of torture. Sam checked into a sterile motel on the edge of town, the days stretching into an eternity. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He just paced the small room, the image of Lily's terrified face, seared into his memory. Every friendly gesture from his Uncle Arthur, every clumsy word of comfort, every shared holiday dinner over the past 25 years now played back in his mind, recast in a sinister, predatory light. The found scrap of red cardigan, the angels fly away comment. It was all there, a pattern of deception he had been too young and too grief-stricken to see. 2 days later, Sheriff Evans called. "The lab results are in," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "The trace DNA they managed to recover from inside the bracelet clasp is a familial match to Carol Peterson. There is no doubt, Mr. Miller. This was Lily's. The confirmation was a gut punch, a brutal finality to a quarter-century of desperate clinging hope. The photograph is more complicated," Evans continued. "They've enhanced it. The image of the man is too degraded for a positive facial recognition. It's just a partial profile, a shadow. Legally, it's a John Doe." Sam's heart sank. "But," Evans said, a new edge to her voice, "the background is another story. They've managed to pull incredible detail from the setting. They've identified the make and model of the water. Heater in the background. It's a Rheem model produced between 1972 and 1975. The stone in the walls is a specific type of local granite, common in the foundations of older homes in this area, specifically those built before 1950. We're no longer just looking for a ghost, Mr. Miller. We're looking for a room." The first shockwave hit Sam with the force of a physical blow. The investigation now had a tangible direction. Evans and her team began the painstaking work of cross-referencing town, building permits and tax records, creating a list of every house in a 5-mile radius of the Disappearance that was constructed before 1950. The list was long. Detectives began discreetly visiting these older homes under various pretexts, a survey about the water system, a follow-up on old town records. They were looking for stone-walled basements with dirt floors and outdated water heaters. For Sam, this was a new and terrible conflict. He knew one of the houses on that list, his uncle, Arthur's house. It was an old farmhouse built by his great-grandfather. He watched from a distance as the detectives worked, a knot of dread and guilt tightening inside him. He felt like a coward for not speaking up, but the fear of being wrong, of falsely accusing a family member and destroying what was left of his family for nothing, was paralyzing. He was caught in a nightmare of his own making, a silent conspirator in an investigation that was slowly, inevitably inching its way toward his own bloodline. The ghost of the past had returned, and it was leading the police down a path that could only end in one of two ways: his vindication or his complete ruin. The days crawled by, each one a duplicate of the last. Sam remained in his motel room, a self-imposed prison, while Sheriff Evans and her team worked their way through the list of old houses. He watched the local news, listened to the town gossip, and heard nothing. The investigation was a silent underwater thing, moving too, slowly for the frantic terror in his heart. The weight of his silence was becoming unbearable. He felt he owed Lily more than just waiting for others to stumble upon a truth he already held. He needed to be sure. He drove to the storage unit where he had temporarily stored the boxes from his parents' house. He spent an entire afternoon sifting through the archives of his family's life, pulling out dusty photo albums. He flipped through page after page of birthdays, holidays, and vacations, his own life story staring back at him. It was a life neatly divided into two parts: the bright, colorful years with Lily and the muted, subdued years that followed. He was about to give up when he found it. The album was labeled Christmas 1998, a year after Lily was gone. He remembered that Christmas. It was a hollow, joyless affair, the first one without the Petersons next door. His parents had forced a semblance of normalcy, insisting they go to the family gathering at Uncle Arthur's house. The photograph was near the back. It showed a young, sullen Sam, maybe 10 years old, standing awkwardly by the fireplace with his parents. But it was the background that made his blood run cold. Over his mother's shoulder, a doorway was open. And through that doorway, for just a fraction of a second, the camera had captured a glimpse of another room. A room with a rough, unmistakable stone wall. He didn't hesitate. He drove straight to the sheriff's station, the photo album in his hands, and laid it open on Sheriff Evans's desk. Evans looked at the photo, then back at Sam. For the first time, she saw the certainty in his eyes. She picked up a magnifying glass and examined the image closely. "This was taken at your uncle's house?" "Yes," Sam said, his voice steady. "Christmas, 1998. Evans leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. His name was on our list. His house was built in 1922. We hadn't gotten to him yet. She looked at Sam, a new understanding in her gaze. "You've suspected him all along, haven't you?" "I wasn't sure," Sam lied, though it felt like the truth. "How could I be?" Sheriff Evans nodded slowly. She now had more than just a statistical probability. She had a direct link. She and her lead detective went to Arthur Vance's property that same afternoon. Arthur's house was isolated, set back from the road at the end of a long gravel driveway. It was neat and well-maintained on the outside, a picture of quiet country life. Arthur himself answered the door, looking surprised but not alarmed to see the sheriff. He was older now, stooped and silver-haired, but he still had the same wire-rimmed glasses, the same placid, unreadable expression. "Sheriff Evans," he said, his voice mild, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Mr. Vance," Evans began, her tone polite but firm, "we're following up on some old town records as part of a historical survey. We understand this house has a basement." Arthur's face remained a perfect mask of benign curiosity. "That's right. Had one anyway." "Had one?" the detective asked, stepping forward slightly. "Yes," Arthur said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Had a terrible moisture problem for years. The old stone foundation, you know. Constant dampness. About 15 years ago, I had the whole thing sealed off. Poured a new concrete floor, put up drywall. It's just a storage crawl space now. Best decision I ever made." He smiled, a thin, unassuming smile. "Can't help you much with your survey. I'm afraid. There's nothing to see down there anymore." He delivered the lines with flawless ease. His story was plausible, logical. It was the perfect explanation, the perfect dead end. But Sheriff Evans watched his eyes. They were calm, too calm. He was a man offering a helpful explanation, but there was no flicker of curiosity, no question about why they were really there. He was simply shutting a door. "You said you sealed it off 15 years ago?" Evans asked, her voice casual. "That's right. Around 2010, I believe. A local contractor did the work. It was a brilliant lie. It created a clear, believable timeline. It accounted for the basement's existence and explained its current inaccessibility. It dared them to challenge it." For a moment the two officers stood on the porch, the quiet of the countryside settling around them. Arthur's story was a brick wall, but for Sheriff Evans, the lie itself was the tell. It was too neat, too perfect. A man with nothing to hide might have been confused, might have offered to show them the crawl space. Arthur offered only a closed door. He wasn't just answering a question. He was blocking an investigation. She gave him a polite nod. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Vance. That's very helpful information." They walked back to their car, the gravel crunching under their feet. The detective looked at her, frustrated. "A brick wall. We can't get a warrant based on a sealed basement." "No," Evans said, a glint in her eye as she started the word. "Car, we can't." But he didn't just tell us about a renovation. He gave us a date. He gave us a contractor. He just told a specific, verifiable lie. This was the aha moment. Arthur, in his arrogance, hadn't just denied access. He had created a false narrative. A narrative that could be dismantled piece by piece. If the contractor didn't exist, or if the work was never done, his lie would become the probable cause they needed. His attempt to build a wall around his secret had inadvertently given them the key to knocking it down. Back at the station, Evans didn't waste a second. She didn't bother looking for a contractor from 15 years ago. She went straight to a judge. She laid out the entire case. The discovery of the box, the photo of Lily in a stone basement, the family picture confirming a similar basement existed in Arthur Vance's home, and finally, the suspect's preemptive and highly specific claim that the potential crime scene had been permanently sealed. "He's not just denying access, Your Honor," she argued. "He is actively concealing a location that is material to a cold case homicide investigation. His lie is evidence of guilt." The judge agreed. The warrant was signed before the sun went down. Sheriff Evans now had the one thing she needed, the legal authority to break through Arthur Vance's wall and reveal whatever truth or whatever horror he had sealed away in the dark. The next morning, a convoy of official vehicles rolled down Arthur Vance's long gravel driveway. The procession was quiet, almost funereal, but it moved with undeniable purpose. Sheriff Evans was in the lead car. Behind her, a forensics van and several patrol cars. Sam Miller was there, too, parked on the main road at the edge of the property. Evans had told him to stay away, but he couldn't. He had to see the end of the story he had started. He sat in his rental car, a silent witness, watching the final act unfold from a distance. Arthur answered the door, a cup of coffee in his hand. When he saw Sheriff Evans holding the search warrant, the placid mask he had worn for decades didn't just crack, it dissolved. The mild, unassuming uncle vanished, replaced by a man whose eyes were flat and cold with a sudden, reptilian fury. He didn't speak as Evans and her team entered his home. The charade was over. They went straight to the basement. The air in the house was stale, meticulously clean, the home of a man who left nothing to chance. The basement door opened into a small, finished storage room with pristine white drywall, just as he had described. But now it was no longer a barrier. It was the target. A detective used a sledgehammer. The first blow echoed through the silent house, a sound of violent catharsis. Dust plumed into the air. With each subsequent strike, the flimsy wall of his lie was demolished. Behind it, dark and damp, was the old stone foundation. It was the room from the photograph. The forensics team moved in, their work quiet and methodical. They set up lights, illuminating the packed dirt floor and the ancient weeping stone. While they worked, the narrator's voice begins to explain the truth that lay buried beneath their feet, a truth hidden for 25 years in the twisted mind of a monster. Arthur Vance was a man who lived his life behind a wall of his own making long before he built one in his basement. His reclusive nature wasn't shyness. It was a symptom of a profound pathology. He saw the world not as a place to participate in, but as a collection of things to observe. And he had observed the pure, radiant friendship between his nephew and the little girl next door. He saw their easy affection, their shared secrets, their boundless joy, and he didn't feel happiness. He felt a corrosive, all-consuming jealousy. He became obsessed with Lily. In his distorted mind, she was a perfect, beautiful thing, an object to be possessed. His motivation wasn't lust, but a sterile and terrifying desire for ownership. He wanted to keep her just as she was, an innocent 8-year-old girl, frozen in time, belonging only to him. His jealousy of Sam was a quiet, burning rage. He felt Sam was unworthy of Lily's affection. On that October afternoon, after Lily had left the treehouse, she took a shortcut that passed by Arthur's property. He was waiting for her. He lured her in with a simple, irresistible promise, the same kind of trick he'd used to earn the children's trust all along. He told her he had a secret to show her in his workshop, something special just for her. Trusting her friend's uncle, she followed. The basement was his kingdom, a place of total control. The moment the heavy door closed behind them, the friendly mask was gone. The horror of what happened next was swift and brutal, a sudden, violent extinguishment of a bright light, committed by a man who believed that if he couldn't exclusively possess her light, he must hide it from the world forever. Back in the present, the forensics team stopped digging. The lead technician looked up at Sheriff Evans and gave a single, grim nod. They had found her. Buried deep beneath the dirt floor were the small, delicate bones of a child, and tangled among them a tarnished silver bracelet. Sheriff Evans walked back upstairs. Arthur was sitting at his kitchen table, perfectly still, staring out the window. He looked up at her as she entered the room, his face empty of all emotion. "Arthur Vance," Evans said, her voice ringing. "With the cold authority of justice delayed, you are under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Lily Peterson." As the detective cuffed his hands behind his back, Arthur didn't resist. He didn't speak. The face of evil was not contorted in a monstrous snarl. It was quiet. It was banal. It was the face of a nondescript old man who had hidden a graveyard inside himself. From his car, Sam watched as his uncle was led out of the house, the man who had built his treehouse, who had patted him on the back, who had attended every family holiday for 25 years. Seeing him in handcuffs didn't bring the relief Sam had expected. There was no triumph, no cathartic release. There was only a profound, sickening wave of nausea. This was the monster. Not a stranger, not a drifter, but his own blood. The betrayal was absolute, a poison that would now taint every memory he had left. The trial of Arthur Vance was a quiet, somber affair. He remained silent throughout the proceedings, a ghost in the courtroom, offering no confession, no explanation, no remorse. Confronted with the DNA evidence from the bracelet and the irrefutable forensic proof from his own basement, he simply stared ahead, his face a blank wall. The prosecution laid out the story of his secret obsession, his calculated deception, and the brutal act of violence that stole a child from the world. For the town of Havenwood, it was a reckoning. The monster wasn't a faceless stranger. He was one of their own, a man who had lived among them, hidden in plain sight. For Lily's parents, Carol and David Peterson, now frail and gray, it was the end of a 25-year vigil. They sat in the front row every day, listening to the horrific details, their faces etched with a grief that was ancient and new at the same time. Arthur Vance was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A judge's words sealed his fate, condemning him to spend the rest of his days in a concrete box, a pale imitation of the one he had built for his victim. Justice, in its slow, grinding way, had finally been served. But for Sam Miller, the verdict was not an ending. He did not find peace. The truth he had chased for his entire adult life did not bring the clean, simple relief he had craved. Instead, the uncertainty that had haunted him for decades was replaced by a certainty that was, in many ways, more terrible. The ghost of the unknown was gone, but the ghost of the known was a far more horrific companion. He now had to learn to live with the knowledge that the man who taught him how to tie a fishing knot, the man who brought him soup when he was sick, was a murderer. Every good memory was now poisoned, every act of kindness recast as a monstrous manipulation. Closure was not a feeling of peace. It was the brutal, exhausting relief of knowing, forever mixed with the horror of the truth. It was learning to live with the scars. Sam didn't run away from Havenwood this time. He stayed. He used the inheritance from his parents, along with his own savings, to buy his uncle's property from the state. The town watched, bewildered, as he brought in a demolition crew. He stood on the gravel driveway and watched as a machine with a giant metal claw tore into the house where so much pain had been hidden. He watched as the walls came down, as the roof collapsed, as the basement where Lily took her last breath was reduced to a pile of rubble and splintered wood. It was not an act of anger, but an act of purification. He was erasing a stain from the earth. In the months that followed, a new structure began to rise where the house of horrors once stood, but it wasn't a house. Sam, the architect, designed it himself. It was a playground, a beautiful open space filled with sunlight, with bright blue swings, a winding yellow slide, and a sandbox in the shape of a star. In the center he planted a young oak tree. It was named Lily's Landing. It became a place of life, a place of joy. The sound of children's laughter now echoed where there had once been only a terrible silence. Sam had transformed a site of unimaginable darkness into a legacy of light. He couldn't bring Lily back, but he could honor her spirit, her boundless energy, her love of adventure. He ensured her lasting legacy would be one of joy, a safe place for other children to make their own happy memories. Sam would often visit, not to dwell on the past, but to witness the present. He'd sit on a bench near the young oak tree, watching as a new generation of children chased each other, their laughter echoing in the evening air. One day, an elderly couple approached him. It was Carol and David Peterson, Lily's parents. They watched the scene with him, a fragile, peaceful smile on Carol's face. "You would have loved this," she said softly, placing a hand on Sam's arm. "All this life." In that moment, watching the setting sun cast a golden glow on the swings, Sam finally understood. There was no erasing the scar, but here, in this place of light, he had finally given it a new shape, the shape of hope. The story of Lily Peterson is a powerful reminder that truth, no matter how long it is buried, can be brought to light. Our mission is to continue telling these important stories, honoring the legacies of those lost, and celebrating the justice they are finally given. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, please consider joining our community by subscribing. Leave a like to show your support, and share in the comments which part of this journey impacted you the most.